So let's start with Luke Wagner.
Good morning, everyone. Luke Wagner here. I'm the Senior Specialist for Democracy and Governance at Chemonics. I'm excited to be joining.
Great, thanks, Luke.
Yeah.
Next person to my screen is Angela Canterbury.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi, I'm Angela Canterbury. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications and Advocacy at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, mouthful, or IFES. And it's a pleasure to meet all of you.
Thanks so much, Angela. Welcome. Next, Andrea.
Good morning, all. I'm trying to, Sorry about that. Good morning, all. My name is Andrea Liferoci. I am an Associate Director of the Democracy Program at the Carter Center, where I work with Barbara. Glad to be here today.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, over to Derek.
Hi, everybody. I'm Derek Binkerhoff. I'm Emeritus Distinguished Fellow at RTI International. I'm the former co-chair of this working group. I held that position for 7 years before they put in place term limits. I'm currently co-chair of the DC-based community of practice on thinking and working politically.
Thanks so much, Derek, and thanks for all the great work you did over that 7-year period. Matthew, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Click. I'm the Director of Research and Learning at Causal Design. We're actually a research and evaluation shop based in Denver, Colorado.
Great, thanks, Matthew.
And this is my first time joining, so nice meeting everyone.
Irving. I'll go back to Irving. How about Lisa Mcgregor?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Mcgregor. I'm the Technical Director for Governance for RTI. Good to see or meet some of you. I may only be able to stay for the first hour, so just heads up, I might have to sign off early, but thanks for organizing this.
Great, thanks so much, Lisa. Okay, Irving, back to you.
I may be the oldest member of this group because I know I was involved in the creation of SID 50 years ago. I am a retired minister counselor in USAID, where my specialty was government and public administration. And I then was a professor at American University teaching it. And I've got a PhD in public administration and government from American University. And I know a lot of the people here, and I may write a book one of these days. So I'm glad to be with you all and learn as much as I can about what happened since yesterday.
Thanks so much, Irving. The last block I see is Lisa iPhone. Lisa Mcgregor, is that your second connection or is that a different individual?
Yes, that's me. Just having two connections so that the sound is good. Thanks.
Okay, no problem at all. So it's everyone that's online so far. If anyone else joins, we'll be sure to give them an opportunity to chime in, introduce themselves. With that, though, I will move into the kind of purpose of today, which is to set the work group agenda for the next 12 months. And I think Barbara is going to walk us through, before we do that, what the purpose of the work group is. So we're all aware on the same page.
Yeah, thanks. And so this will be a repeat for a lot of you who've participated or co-chaired or been very involved. But since we have a number of new folks, I'll just quickly reiterate sort of our objectives and mission. So, of course, with SID Washington, the idea here is to create this town hall sort of atmosphere for the development community through these working groups. And of course, we have working groups on various topics, including DRG. They're chaired, of course, by the two co-chairs. And then our mandate is to to really focus on discussions around key development challenges and share best practices and innovation with this community. And then, so for DRG specifically, right, we're working on informing and educating on development issues related to democracy, rights, and governance, as well as how civil society helps shape economic and social outcomes and informs the DRG work across the sector. So that's just a quick summary, just to sort of help us guide our discussion as we're thinking through this. Thinking about innovation, best practices, and what are these key development challenges. So back over to Patrick.
So that core mission in mind, the goal for today really is to agree on topics for 2 public events we'll organize over the next year. We want to make sure that those events are of interest and relevant for all of you, the constituents at your organizations, as well as folks coming in with the new administration. So in advance of this meeting, many of you completed a survey asking you to rank order potential event topics. Barbara, myself, Paul, and others developed this initial preliminary list of potential topics based on our understanding of priority items for the incoming administration, for example, kleptocracy, and recent developments or persistent issues in the DRG space that all of you are very much aware of, for example, backsliding. To refresh your memory, here are 9 topics listed in order of the number of votes they received, and I will drop them into the chat shortly. So first, democratic backsliding and closing space for civil society, both analytic approaches to understanding the problem, as well as what are some evidence-based programming interventions to counter it, or even better, prevent it. Second, digital democracy, broadly conceived, technology, social media, as well as disinformation. Third, setting forth a DRG agenda for the next decade, the Biden administration, but also beyond. Fourth, I would argue linked to that, countering kleptocracy, understanding it, as well as programmatic interventions. Fifth, understanding and addressing the impact of China's engagement on development and democracy. Sixth, the importance of DRG to implementation of the recently passed and released Global Fragility Act and associated strategy. Seventh, good governance and effective health systems. Eighth, human rights and DRG assistance, in particular addressing abuses against minority populations. Ninth, and finally, private sector involvement in governance programs. We'll do our best to come to an agreement today on these 2 events. If we're unable to do so, I think Barbara and I will take all views into account and try to make that final determination in a way that best reflects your perspectives. So from here, we want to get your inputs on these topics. Given that we're a small group, I think we can just have people chime in or raise your hand like this, vice the click function. So over to Barbara to begin the discussion on that, and I'll put the topics in the chat.
Great.
Thanks. I'll give Patrick just a moment to put those in the chat. I know that was a lot of content. Okay, so we have the topics in the chat. Again, he mentioned the survey that we conducted. One thing I wanted to ask up front too is, looking at this again now, is there anything you all think is missing? Is there any, are there any modifications that you would make to what's currently listed? I'm looking at, okay, Irving, please.
Yeah, one question in terms of the discussion that goes on. Have all of you actually served overseas and been in touch with the developing countries that we're talking about? Or is this a lot of top-down stuff? I just want to get some background.
So I don't know everyone's background here, but for myself, yes, I've served overseas in a number of different places, both with USAID and partner organizations. Pretty sure a number of people here have also done that as well. But that's a good point in terms of looking at the topics from that perspective. And I wonder 2 things. One, just throwing this out to Patrick as well. If given what Irving has just said, if anything just strikes you, or Irving, if anything strikes you, as to should these be worded in a different way, or is there a particular topic that's missing?
So Barbara, if I could, maybe just one addition to what you just said is that whatever topics we select or, give top priority, like we did with the thinking and working politically, we make sure that the voices are from the field and not necessarily from Washington telling everyone how things should be done. I think that's an approach to get at also what's being suggested. Thanks.
Yeah, Irving, that Lisa raised a good point. We recently, when was it? Actually, it's not so recently anymore. I think this summer had an event.
End of July.
Yeah, thinking and working politically. And we had, I think, 4 recorded voices from the field. And then we had a panel discussion, which also included voices from the field. So that is obviously a very important part of the engagement that we have.
And to chime in just briefly, one of the parts of the meeting will be certainly agreeing on the topics broadly conceived, but once there is some agreement there, thinking through the ideal format for these sessions. So voices from the field, perhaps DC, even getting down into names of potential speakers. So all good points.
I mean, I don't want to overdo this. You talked about voices from the field, but my first assignment was in Turkey in 1950. And the thing that made that useful is at that point, we had an anthropologist, professional anthropologist, who's part of the public administration program. And that made such a big difference for somebody who really understood, taught us how to understand local culture. Because I may be repeating what everybody knows, but in the old days when aid was created, we told them what to do. But the world has now changed, and I spent a lot of time in Africa, and I spent a lot of time in the field, sitting with the Tuareg, talking to them, finding out what they wanted. And my role was to work with them to help them create what it is that they wanted. When I was in Mali, they wanted a huge hospital out in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and I ended up convincing them, how about having just a clinic, and the hospital would be in Senegal or in Bamako. It's that kind of getting the feel for what they want, and that it is our role, all of those who are sitting here, is to get the local people to decide what they want and help them to create what they want. It may not be the form that we have here in the United States, but there are certain guiding principles that we as professionals think that how local people do it. I may be overstating that, but in my many years working, that is the kind of thing that I thought I learned best. And I'll close with this: one of the most useful things I ever did was, I forget which African country, there was a pregnant woman, and I said, you have to now wash your hands every day. And that was something that was surprising to her. She didn't understand why. That's how basic getting the local people to do what is necessary for them. I'll sign off.
Thanks, Irving. Luke?
Yeah, just briefly, and perhaps this comment fits more in the context of a lens through which we look at whatever the top selected topics are. But I don't know if it's worth mentioning COVID and its effect on some of these different elements. I know, ranging from exacerbating challenges to opening new opportunities for more digital outreach in terms of citizen government engagement, to also opening up more avenues for things like kleptocracy and corruption in places as well. So that may be more of a cross-cutting thing that comes up later in the conversation, but just wanted to flag that.
That's great. I think both what Irving mentioned and what you mentioned are cross-cutting in some ways. I know a number, for example, I believe, and Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, but a number of other working groups are also dealing with this issue of decolonizing development or looking at community-driven development, or sort of trying to address that angle, but also COVID as well has come up, and how COVID has changed development, impacted development, is, I believe, come up in the other some of the other working groups as well. Those are both good suggestions. I know we need to get to other folks as well, though. Luke, did you have something else? Your hand's still up.
No, sorry.
Okay, no, it's okay. Just wanted to make sure.
No, thank you.
Lula.
Hi,
then-
everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks. I just wanted to make the point about, I recently worked on a proposal for the ACES IDIQ, which is USAID's going to be a contracting mechanism, and our company was in BAFO, and I managed the proposal. So I know that the way that USAID is going to be approaching DRG, and hopefully they are already, it's about integrating DRG issues into all the development sectors. And I think in line with that, perhaps we need to be kind of, in step with that. And I think it might help to mainstream, some of these 9 topics when we talk about integrating DRG into be it health or energy or service delivery or municipal services. And we see more and more. I mean, for us who are DRG practitioners, we've always integrated DRG in everything that we do. Now, hopefully, it's going to be formalized. And so, and I also, the other point I wanted to raise is the USA transformation with the new DDI Bureau. There may be an opportunity as well to elevate DRG issues. As you know, they have not been sufficiently, I think, incorporated or addressed with the agency historically. There has not been resources, that kind of give them its due. So perhaps also with the new structure and that new larger bureau, there's an opportunity to do that as well. So I just wanted to raise those 2 issues. Thank you.
Thanks. That's the integration of DRG, as a number of people know on this call, is very near and dear to my heart. It was part of what we when I was at USAID, added as a key element to the 2013 DRG strategy. So the integration across sector. So appreciate that comment as well. Lisa, I thought you had your hand up a minute ago. Did you want to chime in on any of this?
Yeah, I agree actually with Rula that DRG integration, there's a number of the topics that suggest that. So I would strongly support that. Thanks.
Great. Any other new topics or modifications to existing topics that folks would recommend? Angela?
Yes, thanks. I do want to second the COVID suggestion, the COVID impact suggestion. And then also we might consider something along the lines of youth political participation. We've done a few events at IFAS, and they were really well received. We had a great participation with partners in the field. Very inspiring. Not everything is in the sector right now. Also, inclusion could be a topic for consideration. And lastly, the Democracy Summit that Biden has promised. We might consider doing a side event to that in some respect.
Could you expand on your point related to inclusion? There's so many different aspects we could cover, so I'm curious to know what specifically.
Yes, there certainly are. And so we could make it narrow or quite broad, inclusion encompassing all marginalized populations, across, abilities and race. We could do, quite a bit around that. What does inclusion mean in different places? There's quite a bit of variation. And so that could be interesting, a comparative analysis.
Thank you. Any other, Andrea, please.
Yes, I think it's a topic which is somehow intrinsic to many of these points, but I think that probably would be interesting and worth mentioning inequality as a challenge that goes beyond economics and includes inequality in terms of political participation, broader political rights, etc., which is being affected by, it's already existing and being affected further by COVID impacts, both economically and politically. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So I think we've had, by my count, four that have supported the idea of adding COVID as a topic as well. So just noting that we have broad support for that. And then I just wanted to make sure everyone had saw the note from Lisa suggesting that we soften the term kleptocracy and expand to anti-corruption, transparency, and accountability. So any other comments before we move on to discuss this prioritization of topics? Anything? Okay, I'll hand back over to Patrick.
Thanks, Barbara. And Angela, great point on inclusion in youth. If not a standalone event, certainly a component, I would argue, of any topic we choose is something we should explore. So trying to get to agreement on selection of the topics listed in the chat, those 9, as well as the other ideas posed, are there strong feelings on which ones we definitely should select? And if so, why?
I think having something related to the new Biden administration and what their agenda is, at the appropriate time when they've had time to plan, would be highly popular and very, I think, helpful for everyone. I would also say that maybe we could combine some of these ideas into a little bit of a smorgasbord is not the right word, but new approaches in DRG or something like that. The digital democracy, some of them could be packaged together. So those are my 2 points. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Both great points, and either the Biden administration angle or combining would give us the opportunity to feature a number of these topics together. Roll, I do see your hand up. I'm not sure if that's a holdover from your previous comment or a new one, but do want to make sure that we give the opportunity. Okay.
It's a holdover. I put it in the chat. I like the digital democracy one, and maybe it's digital governance because, it might be broader because it's not necessarily democracy being promoted digitally, that's what I was saying, but all types of governance structures, sadly.
Yeah, great point. Whether it's civic tech, gov tech, all different types of angles to tackle that. Other thoughts? Strong feelings on any of these topics?
So Patrick, I wanted to just jump in and ask this question in a little bit of a different way. I thank you, Lisa, for the suggestion of sort of synthesizing some of these together. I think both around sort of the Biden agenda and then around sort of new approaches. I wonder, is there anything that's an outlier from those 2 topics that we don't think could be folded in, but that we do think needs to still be addressed? I imagine COVID could be discussed in the context of both the sort of how the Biden administration is going to shift or alter its approach, but also in terms of new approaches. I think, digital, for example, is something that, I know for us, for example, I think we're doing quite a bit more in that space because of the limitations in terms of face-to-face engagement. And we've all had to innovate around sort of use of social media, et cetera. but are there others that we should be that we would be remiss in not also sort of identifying and discussing? Any thoughts?
Barbara, just a question. I wonder if we narrow it down to a certain number of topics, do we want to send it out to the listserv and say and have people, quote unquote, vote for what they are most interested in? Is that something that the subgroup has done before?
That's a great question. I'm going to toss it over to Paul. You know, we sent the survey out initially, but once we narrow this down, I don't know if SID has gone back to the working group. So Paul, can you chime in on that? And then Matt, I see your hands up, so we'll get to you next.
Thanks, Barbara. After the fact, no. It's usually during the meeting itself that we discuss, and the co-chairs and myself, we decide. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm the director of programs for SID-W. So I help manage all of these different programs that we do, all these different events that we do. But that's, long story short, is no. Usually it's up to myself and the co-chairs. Emphasis on co-chairs.
Matthew?
Sure, my volume just sort of dropped for a second. Apologies if you're waiting. You know, I'm not, it's very broad, but it's hard for me to leave the backsliding behind. And I'm wondering if possibly some of these elements, including digital governance, et cetera, are a piece of that puzzle and couldn't be folded under that if that indeed as a topic remains too broad. We're looking at everything from countries within the EU to, of course, the United States, to the arrests in Hong Kong last night, to on and on and on. Of course, the ongoing struggles in some of the developing countries where we work. It's hard for me to leave it behind as a topic that is relevant, will be something that the Biden administration confronts, is in fact kind of struggling with, and will enter with those headwinds, making democracy relevant still. So I don't know where it fits. Again, I recognize it's awfully broad, but again, I just hesitate to let it slide off the agenda entirely.
Thanks. So I guess, Patrick, I don't know, do you want to move to sort of a discussion of the planning for sessions? Do you feel comfortable for volunteers who could help? So one of the things we're looking for, of course, are but also volunteers that can help us shape these as well into those, you know, especially if we're going to be synthesizing some of these topics, like backsliding, which can be, you know, so broad. And for example, I will just give a shout out to, you know, Lisa and Derek from RTI were just instrumental in making our last event such a great success on political economy analysis and thinking and working politically. So just anyway, over to Patrick for that part of the discussion.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think it seems like, at least for one of the event topics, there is some consensus around the need to focus on what the Biden administration's DRG agenda might be. So worth talking through what format we all think would make the most sense, how to structure that, and even speakers. So open the floor to all of you for your thoughts. Sure, Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I think obviously on that one, the extent to which we could get someone from the Biden administration to be a speaker would be sort of the primary one. So, you know, for those who have connections to whoever is going to be coming in, I think that would be helpful. Another group that in the past we've had drawing in on some of these, and this relates to the Democratic backsliding, is Tom Carruthers at Carnegie is always a really good speaker, and he's also a draw. A lot of people want to hear what he has to say. So you know, when we move to selecting topics, that's someone who might be worth reaching out to see if he would be willing to be a speaker as well. And then just on some of the other things, one of the things in the past that has worked well is to get one of the other SID work groups to co-sponsor with us. So I think the one that jumps to mind, given that we've talked about COVID, is to co-sponsor something with the health group. But there are multiple other work groups out there as well. I think in the past we've done something with the knowledge one. And then there's some private sector ones as well. So thinking just beyond our own work group, but reaching out to some of the other ones is also a good approach.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. All good points. Certainly, Tom is always a very smart individual. Based on other comments earlier on in the discussion, perhaps Biden administration official, either Tom Carruthers or members of our work group, laying out what the challenges are, and then one or two people speaking to what new approaches exist to confront those challenges, including wrapping in COVID. Just a few thoughts for your consideration. Rola, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I wanted to say that perhaps one topic or one type of event that would hit multiple birds with one stone is perhaps talking about the importance of governance and democracy and rights when it comes to climate change. We know climate change is going to be huge for the Biden administration. And when we talk about integration again, the DRG issues when it comes to environment and those types of global issues could open up opportunities also to collaborate with the SID Washington Environment Group and maybe some others, and perhaps you could get Kerry himself. He's going to be the new envoy. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, where you can appeal to broader audiences if you combine these two topics, because I think climate change in particular is a global challenge that requires a lot of governance. In terms of capacity, commitment, you can talk about the journey to self-reliance. There's a lot of things that kind of click naturally. So I would recommend kind of that. Another idea that I had is perhaps also if we are going to pick up the issue of the backsliding and perhaps thinking of regions in the world, if you wanted to talk about the Middle East, for example, or try to do something that appeals to regions. We're seeing a lot of action in the Middle East. I'm calling you from Beirut, actually. I'm based out of here, and so that's my geographic area of expertise. But we are seeing a lot of changes in the region, backsliding and also geopolitical shifts that have a lot of I think they're going to be a challenge to the Biden administration, but also could provide opportunities. So these are just some two suggestions.
Yeah, thanks for all the great points. Go ahead, Lisa,
Sorry to interrupt. One other note on the backsliding is that I guess it's topic number 5 about China's influence. There's lots of other influences. I don't want to focus just on China, but it seems like 1 and 5 might have a connection, that there's democratic backsliding, what kind of influences are affecting that, both internally in a country, but also external influences that are encouraging it, I guess is the point. So I think that would be a really interesting topic and very relevant, one that's been coming up a lot. And I know that the DRG Center, I don't know, maybe 1.5 years, 2 years ago, set up a team that works on that topic. I don't know who leads it or where they are on their agenda, but there's a separate team working on that. Thanks.
Yeah, great point, Lisa. That so-called external malign influence will feature prominently with this administration, as it did with the Trump administration. Other thoughts and inputs on an event focused on helping set the Biden administration's DRG agenda?
So I do know someone that's on the transition team for the Biden campaign, who is a former State Department and USAID, who was part of the agency review, I think for State or USAID as well. he could definitely put me in touch if you wanted some contacts for the DRG or region specific. Let me know and I can definitely reach out to him.
Great, thanks, Rolla.
Just one quick question with regards to some of the, taking this through the lens of the Biden administration and some of the priorities. Was that sort of the thinking, and apologies, I was not one of the ones who filled out the survey beforehand, but was that one of the thinking, some of the thinking behind the sixth point there about the Global Fragility Act and the Global Fragility Strategy? Was the thought there to kind of link it to the Biden administration as well, just given that that's such an overt U.S. government avenue of thinking? I don't know if that's what the thought there was, but I think that would also fit nicely under the framing of the Biden administration and would also tie into a couple of the other elements that have been talked about as well already, the malign influence as well as Democratic backsliding. So just a thought there.
Yeah, number 6 really meant to encapsulate the intersection between, as you know quite well, Luke, conflict and governance, and whether we focus just on the strategy itself or lump that into the broader event where we put forth those recommendations for the new Biden folks. I think either way, discussing at least briefly DRG assistance in conflict affected areas should be a focus of that particular event.
So Patrick, one other point about your question about the Biden administration, hearing from them what their initial thoughts are, but and I don't know the answer to this, but what are those voices that we want to bring to bear to influence what they're going to focus in on? And kind of to Irving's point early on is, what are those voices from outside the US, particularly in developing countries, that we can bring to more influence the agenda and sharpen it? Thanks.
Yeah, excellent point. And that gets to even the continued discussion on the format of the event, who we bring as speaker, to make sure that whatever arguments are being presented are being made by folks who can do so in the most compelling fashion. So certainly welcome your thoughts, Lisa, and those from others in the group as to who that should be.
We could definitely give it some thought about who are those people that might be able to bring their viewpoint. I'm going to put Derek on the spot. Any thoughts on that side, Derek, of voices outside of the U.S. to influence and enlighten the agenda?
Well, I think, as we know, there are some think tanks in developing countries, and we might be able to tap into them. One thing that might be interesting, if we could pull it off, would be to do some sort of survey prior to the event, and obviously it would be limited, but nonetheless collecting some thoughts. So not just relying on whether we could get a speaker from a particular country or not, but bringing in some other voices. And there may be some organizations out there who would be willing to do sort of like a little mini survey for us, to sort of tap into some of the concerns. And I think we can kind of identify what those are, but just hearing what people's particular takes on them are, I think would help to inform the event, and as Irv was saying, sort of make it more, not just a Washington type event, but some voices from the field as well.
Thanks, Derek. We can think through the logistics around that, but definitely a good point. Other thoughts on this first potential event topic? If not, that's okay. Barbara and I can put our heads together and try to aggregate all the good thoughts presented here and go back out to select members of the group who have expressed interest in helping plan this for additional thoughts. And certainly Lisa, Derek, and others would, and Rolla, ask you follow up with Barbara and myself with the speaker ideas, as well as the connection that Rolla mentioned. So I'll hand it back over to Barbara to help walk us through the second potential event topic.
Great. And just for, I think we had at least one or two folks join just while we've been discussing these topics, just to catch them up. We've had a discussion about the both the listed potential topics for our DRG working group, the events coming up that are listed in the chat. There are 9, and then we've sort of come to consensus around 2 broad themes. One is on sort of looking at for the Biden administration's priorities in DRG, and then the second one, which we're going to discuss now, key challenges and new approaches in DRG. And in my notes, and this is where I'll ask those of you who've been part of the discussion to chime in. What I've captured is malign influence and democratic backsliding as a key challenge. Of course, working in the COVID context as a key challenge. Opportunities include, digital, both a challenge and opportunity. This falls into both, is sort of the digital democracy and governance aspect. Integration, I think, falls into both. This is something we recognize now as important, but how do we make sure that we're doing this effectively? And then, of course, elevating voices and empowering, the field is also something that I think is something we're focused on. But what is the right approach? What are the lessons? And of course, making sure that any event we have does highlight those voices. I really liked Lisa's suggestion of reaching out to think tanks. I just wanted to also emphasize that are sort of non-US based think tanks. I've seen some great pieces from some of those South Africa think tank, Indonesia think tank, etc. On sort of some of these topics. So I'll open up to the group. Anything I missed? Anything else that should be included in challenges and approaches? David.
Sure. I apologize. I joined late. I couldn't get the link to work, but I'll thank you for sending it later. Yeah, one you may have already discussed, but it seems to me would be worth considering is just the rise and spread of populism. It's certainly one that we've had recent experience with, out of step with much of our history. But it's certainly one that's not unique to us. We're seeing it both in developing and developed countries. And I think that presents, as we know, significant challenges to the stability of democratic institutions. And in some ways is a threat that has a bit of paradox in it, because it's mobilizing masses of people who perceive themselves as marginalized. So it has a democratic tenor to it, but often leads to very undemocratic outcomes.
Great. Anything else? Any other thoughts?
That's it for me.
Thank you. Matt, or do you go by Matt or Matthew? Sorry.
Oh, Matt's fine.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Matthew, when I introduce myself because of the hard single syllable last name, it can sound like Mark, but I'm Matt to everyone else. I was just thinking in terms of format, the second topic, the key topics and challenges in DRG, and then we listed quite a few, and we've already talked about, speakers from think tanks, but I could envision a panel format in which time zones notwithstanding, there's beyond just think tanks, we have scholars, academics in these countries. We have CSOs, of course, and human rights leaders, journalists. So I could see quite a diverse panel, both geographically and then kind of by profession, that might be able to cut into this, and then in the spirit of Irving's kind of kickoff comment, really deepen the perspectives from the countries in question. That's it.
That's great. One of the things we did for the Thinking and Working Politically event was videos, so short videos. You know, that helps with the challenge of the time zones. You know, if it's 2 a.m. in another country when we're meeting, you know, then at least we can capture that voice if someone's unable to participate. So great point about the sort of broader array of potential participants, CSOs, journalists, et cetera. Luke.
Yeah, just sort of building off the expanded opportunities for different voices, as well as particularly if we're bringing together a bunch of different topics, breakout groups post a plenary session may be also something to consider for the format. You know, particularly if we're talking about something like democratic backsliding, that takes so many different forms, and being able to dive a little deeper on certain manifestations within that space may be interesting. And could also allow us to bring in, again, more voices, whether that's from different countries and contexts or within those different specialties. It's something to maybe consider for the formatting.
Good idea. We're always challenged by the time limitations, so really appreciate that. Other thoughts? Irving, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, I'm uncomfortable. I was a mission director, and my guidance to my staff is it's up to us in the field to decide what we do, whether it was public administration or agriculture. But because of my training in public administration, my belief, I've said before, that it's up to the local people to do things. And therefore, my guidance to my staff in the field is don't bother with Washington. Don't ask them questions. Take what they say and put it in the corner and decide how we in the field, in dealing with the local people, with the local cultures, with the local issues, is what we're concerned with. Now, everything here that you've talked about sounds great. I'm a professor at American University, and you know, what are we here in the United States doing? Great things about Biden, etc. Fine, interesting academically, but I'm uncomfortable about all of this. I don't care what Biden does. I want to know what President X, Y, or Z of Senegal or other countries do. That, for me, you know, these are all important issues that you're working on. They're fine, they're intellectual. But for me, what the goal of foreign aid is to get the local people. What is the impact of the rainy season in the Sahel on carrying out health? I don't know. I mean, those are the issues that I'm concerned with. Very little of what this is concerned with. And so, you know, I'm repeating what I'm saying, but my guidance to my staff, people in the field, forget what Washington says, forget what those people do. What is it that we in the field, what do we want the Senegalese to do? What is their desire? And so on. I'm repeating myself now, but it's an entirely different world than what everybody here has been talking about.
Thanks.
So Barbara, maybe if I could, if it's okay, I'll comment on that. I think we all understand what you're saying, Irvin, and we agree with you. But missions, I used to work for USAID, and missions are highly influenced by what new Washington approaches, new initiatives, how the funding comes to them.
We weren't. We set them aside. We don't listen to them. We hide them. We tell lies to Washington so that the guys in Washington think they're doing great things. But if it's we who decide what we want in our countries, screw Washington.
I think we're trying to get at what you're saying by having, you know, the think tanks from the countries that and trying to identify good insights from
That's a good
those
idea.
folks.
Think
Yeah,
tanks
that-
in local countries. How do
Right,
we work
that's-
with them? How do we help them? What do we find out it is that they want? How do they impact on the culture of their governments, their people, to achieve their development?
All right, thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Irving. I think one of the notes I made was Irving, you've referenced culture a number of times, and the comment you made earlier on anthropology as well. Trying to think about how to integrate that as well. Maybe it's, you know, I know at one of the organizations that I worked at, the Asia Foundation, we had an emphasis on hiring anthropologists for that very reason, this idea that you need a very deep understanding of local culture and practices. So taking copious notes and we'll think about how we can better integrate and consider and make this more field driven, I guess, is where I'm going with that. That being said, I think what Lisa said as well is very valid. Having worked in both the field and in headquarters for USAID and for partner organizations, you know, there is, you know, budgets are decided, so the funding is decided out of Washington. So there is a relationship there that is perhaps worth exploring as well. One thing I wanted to just mention before we move on are a couple other themes that were listed as possible topics that we haven't discussed. One is private sector involvement in governance programs, and two is human rights and addressing abuses against minority populations. Those were two that haven't yet come up, and I wanted to just make sure or hear from this group to see if either of those should be things that we are integrating or incorporating into the two sort of meta themes that we've sort of in principle agreed to. In particular, new challenges and new approaches in DRG, or either of these things we should make sure are integrated, mindful of the fact that we already have about 4 or 5 other issues we want to discuss. Thoughts? Matt?
Yeah, gosh, I know we already have a lot on our plate, but someone mentioned climate change, and I apologize for missing who brought that up. But related, where I'm going is the intersection with the democratic backsliding. There's been sporadic news, but it's become quite a phenomenon. I have been historically working in Central America and South America, where climate activism has been confronted by violent backlash, sometimes supported directly or indirectly by central government. So that governance of climate change and then climate activism, of course, this relates very much to local communities, priorities, economic development priorities, the effects they're seeing with climate adaptation, resilience. So there's a lot of cross-cutting there. I realize that's open-ended, but I'll perhaps throw it in there. It's something I've been watching and certainly preoccupies me personally, and it seems to dovetail, at least in some level, with democratic backsliding and climate change.
Matthew, a question. What is it that local countries in the field can do about climate change?
Yeah, well, I have I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes to that, in the sense that, I mean, as you well know, and I'm by no means a climate scientist, but you know, the carbon that's driving our issues is not stemming usually from these communities, but rather, you know, the United States, China, et cetera, et cetera. So I look at it very much in terms of adaptation, you know, resilience, but really I'm more, no, you know, we've got serious issues with food security coming down the pike. We already see that. We're already seeing, well, migration. The last big project I worked on was in Ethiopia, where Well, now, of course, you have Ethiopians fleeing to some of the countries from where the refugees I was working with were coming from, driven directly or indirectly, depending on your point of view or your argumentation on climate. So we see a lot of downstream ripple effects of severe climate change effects on the ground now. And what I'm seeing is, yeah, I mean, there is literature out there and documentation, and there are projects on resilience, and there are meaningful outcomes from some of those. So I don't want to be dismissive out of hand. Using local natural materials to limit riverbank cutting, social capital enterprises and village and saving loans organizations, et cetera, in an effort to build sort of the asset base and to respond to climate shocks, so on and so forth. That's great, but I'm also seeing at the same time, preponderance of negative coping strategies around out-migration, like in Nepal and to the Middle East. And so again, where to draw the line, frankly, in terms of the level of analysis, in terms of, the analytical lens through which you look at this. But I see a host of quite deleterious downstream effects, and now I have to stop because it's beyond my scope. I don't know what the best answer is, but it's something that I think communities are confronting now, and is a real challenge. And I think a lot of countries are under-resourced and on the back foot and in a very difficult spot, both politically and then economically, to cope with these challenges. As a bit of a monologue, apologies. Happy to pick this up, Irving, either here or in another venue.
Sorry. Thanks, Matt. We've had a couple others just join us, Rick O'Sullivan and Neil Levine. I was wondering if you could just quickly, let's start with Neil, introduce yourself to the group.
Good morning, everybody. Well, this is a very cozy group. I'm happy to be here. My name is Neil Levine. I'm coming to you from Beverly, Massachusetts. I have been a great admirer of this community of practice for a long time, and delighted to be here. For folks who don't know me, I am recently, 3 years ago, retired from a career at USAID in Capitol Hill. I served at various times as the director of the Office of Conflict Management and Mitigation, and then my last job was as director of the Center of Excellence for Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance. I've had the pleasure of working with many of you over that time in different roles, and pleased to be here this morning. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Neil. Rick? You're on mute.
There we go. Thank you, Barbara, and I apologize for coming in late. I couldn't find the link. I'm Rick O'Sullivan. I'm a civil society specialist. I founded and chaired the Civil Society Workgroup for SID Washington for 7 years before it was folded back into, well, I shouldn't say back, before it was folded into DRNG. My specialization has been helping civil society organizations become self-sustaining and donor independent. That's the only way you're really going to get credible civil society representation when they're no longer dependent on government support. A key to that is civil society as an alternative to government and governance. In fact, I passed a paper on to Barbara and Patrick, I'll gladly share with anyone here, called When Governance is Not Government. The people would be surprised, most development professionals surprised when I tell them that in developed economies, the nonprofit sector is responsible for 75% or more of all regulatory responsibilities. And that means here in the US, federal, state, and local governments combined account for less than a quarter. Yet, the role of civil society as part of the governance process is practically unknown among development professionals. They seem to limit the role to that of advocacy or watchdog, which creates the adversarial relationship it has played a major role in the closing of civil society space. So I'm going to encourage this group to spend some time this year focusing on the governance role of civil society, where it can diffuse the authority out of the government and reduce the trend towards closing civil society space and autocracy. And if you have any questions, I'll gladly answer.
Thanks, Rick. Mike, I'm gonna try to pronounce your last name, Sturzenich. Hi, welcome. Could you also just briefly introduce yourself, your name and your organization? Or
good job on my surname. Thank you. Nice to see you. And Rick O'Sullivan, who I last saw probably at one of the SID events from Colombia, about peacemaking in Colombia several years ago by now, 5 years ago, I think. So I was one of the co-chairs of the Peace and Security Committee and the Democracy and kind of post-conflict co-chair as well, which is now, I think, kind of sifted out into a more sensible arrangement of democracy, rights, and governance on the one hand, peace and security on the other. So I'm very glad to see this change. I just rejoined SID this morning in order to attend this event, which shows how events can prompt membership. And I held back only because I think I remember if you join in December, you have to rejoin in January anyway. So I'm a bit late. I'm therefore totally unprepared for any conversation we may have. And I expect to kind of sit in the background and listen to hear what you all have to say. Thank you very much.
great, well, thank you. So Rick, Neil, and Mike, you've, I think, joined at a good time. In some ways, we debated the 9 proposed topics that are in the chat if you scroll up, and then discussed a couple. We asked for suggestions for those potential topics that aren't listed there, and where we are currently, just to summarize, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, is around sort of 2 meta topics, the DRG agenda under, for the next decade and beyond, and the Biden administration, sort of where is the Biden administration going to go? We thought that was logical given the transition and timing. And then the second, which is even broader, is key challenges and new approaches in DRG. And under that topic, we've, just to summarize, talked about malign influence and democratic backsliding as a key challenge. We've talked about climate change as a key challenge. More recently, that's not listed on in the 9 topics. We also, a number of participants wanted to include or said that it was important that we think about all of this in the context of COVID. And I would even broaden that to pandemics, because WHO has said that this may not even be the big one. So COVID may not be the big one. And then, so opportunities included sort of, and challenges, digital democracy and governance, integration, and we also touched on, but haven't discussed in great detail, the rise of populism, both as, an opportunity, but also a challenge. And I just made a note of, Rick, and I'm glad you joined it, civil society. So that's sort of where we are, is around these sort of meta topics. And then in terms of format and speakers, I'd love to circle back to speakers now, and I'll hand over to Patrick, because we are going to have to wrap up soon. In terms of format, there's been a heavy emphasis on the need to incorporate and integrate and have the field in many ways lead this discussion. So how do we best do that as a sort of US-based entity, through videos, through through breakout groups during the discussions, et cetera. And then in terms of suggestion for specific speakers for topic number 2, key challenges. Tom Carruthers' name came up. And for the former on the Biden administration, of course, it'd be great to have a representative from the new administration. And then we didn't really get into sort of specific speakers from the field, but we did discuss a number of named think tanks. So for example, Rula mentioned the Isam Ferris Institute at the American University of Beirut. So that's sort of where we are, just sort of to kind of wrap up. Patrick, did I miss anything in my list?
No, that's a great summary. Thanks so much,
Great.
Barbara.
So back over to you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Good to see you, Neil, Rick. Thanks for taking the time to join, and Mike as well. What we'd like to do the last 10 minutes here before we wrap up is any final thoughts on either event vis-a-vis particular speakers you have in mind, or especially for event number 2, that key challenges, opportunities, and approaches, particular maybe even sub-themes you all would want us to focus on. Barbara and I'll do so soon. I've dropped her email into the chat. So if anything comes to mind after the event, feel free to be in touch and share thoughts by email as well. So look forward to any final thoughts you have. Sure, Irving, go ahead.
Yeah, Neil Rosenthal. One of the things everybody knows that Neil has been very active in the aid mentoring program. And I think one of the key items in the mentoring program is it's important to get the mentees in the field to know what Washington wants, but it's important, as far as I'm concerned, that we experienced aid people are able to work with the mentees in the field to help them and teach them to learn how to work with local governments, focusing on local issues. Neil, you were not here in the earlier session, but what I just said, what is your view on that? That is, on public administration, is it what we do in the United States, or how we get the local people, our aid people, in the field to learn to work with local people, deal with them, find out what they want, and help to, move them along?
Yeah, that's probably another seminar, but just quickly, I think my first take on it is really helps to put on my other hat as board chair for CDA collaborative development, because this is right in our wheelhouse of kind of privileging, spotlighting, and engaging local actors and local agency. And I don't know if folks know CDA, but that's basically its mandate early on was to, in essence, find out from local actors what it is like to be on the business end of foreign aid, or the receiving end. And from that early work, some groundbreaking work on do no harm in the humanitarian space and on reflective peace practice. And so IRV right now, in its most current iteration, is working quite closely with USAID's Office of Local Works, and is about to, I hope, get awarded a follow-on for something that's called Stopping as Success, which is really about translating best practice for responsible aid exits, so that when we transition out, we're leaving something sustainable behind. And from that work, I think we are trying to broaden out to what does localization really mean? And rather than being our thoughts about what it means, is to hear directly from local actors. And so to specifically answer your question, I would tell my aid mentees to read a blog series that we started called From Where I Stand, which is is either local voices or a curated articles or pieces or analysis of what the summative experience of local voices has to tell us about what kind of relationships local actors want. So little detour there, but that is part of this. In terms of reactions to this list, and I apologize for joining late, this is something maybe to pursue offline in terms of what does SID like I'm a big believer in form following function, and what is the SID chapter uniquely placed to provide as a service. I'm also looking for innovation in terms of delivery about what kind of, rather than a speakers or yet another panel discussion on a topic of import, how do we really deliver ongoing knowledge generation and creation? And that's a broad topic. In terms of what you've said, laid out here in terms of topics, they're all good. They all bring a constituency. I have my own particular interest, or what I think, looking down the road, I think what SID has the ability to do is see where the next set of issues are going to be. And your list kind of reflects that as well. But I would say the what, I would consider the what and the how. And I don't know if it's a book group on steroids or, an expert panel, or what I've been experimenting with, again, in the CDA, is that this group represents to me a small group with a lot of, with very little prep, who are good thinkers, can conceptualize very quickly in the space of an hour-long Zoom call, and everyone can walk away with 2 or 3 nuggets of great ideas. They can walk away with 2 or 3 contacts for continuing discussion, or they can join 2 or 3 networks that they're not already affiliated with. And to me, that is a set of, or the beginning of a value proposition for this group.
Can I add to that, Neil? When you talk about transferring out, over those last many years, I have been brought in the waning months of the 3, 4, 5-year project to be told, we need you to make our local partners self-sustaining. This needs to be part of the project design, not part of the exit strategy. And that's, how these organizations become self-sustaining is never really discussed until the project's shutting down. And what I think we need to look at in terms of governance and passing things along is, how do we need to redesign projects from the get-go so that when they walk away, everything doesn't collapse? Because with this, people say, and I should point out that I spent a couple of years as the assistant director for the Center for Suicide Studies at Johns Hopkins, developing with a lot of the knowledge that we have now about civil societies. And we say, well, we're teaching these organizations to become civil society organizations. No, we're not. We're teaching them to become government subcontractors. And we need to change how we work with them and what they need to become responsible for from the outset. For USAID people, what I propose to them is that in the proposal process, right now what we say is, okay, these are our local partners. And they say, oh, great. What they should be doing is saying, oh, that's wonderful. Have each one of them submit to us a business plan explaining how they're going to continue doing all this after you leave. So I really think we need to, one of the conversations we need to have is, who pays for this and how does it keep going when we're done? Otherwise, they will never be sustained.
Great, Rick. I agree with everything you said.
Great, thanks, Irving, Neil. Good points as always. Thank you, Rick, for that intervention. Appreciate it. Any final thoughts on other aspects of these 2 events we should consider? And layered on top of that, as important, volunteers for helping Barbara and I put these together. So far, we have David, Lisa, Rolla, but would welcome others who we can be in touch with to help plan these 2 sessions.
Also glad to support.
Great, thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, happy to support from our end as well.
Great, thanks, Luke.
I would have to look at what I can do and get back to you, because I literally just rejoined again this morning.
Yeah, no problem at all. Take your time.
Well, I have a great deal of experience with organizing these things, so I'll gladly chip in whenever I can.
Perfect. Thanks, Rick. Well, it seems like we have
I put
critical
my
mass to help
information.
organize. Yeah, thanks, Matthew. The two events. Any final thoughts that folks want to share about other aspects we should be considering, broader thoughts about the utility of this group and moving forward over the next 12 months?
I just ask a question as the newbie. In
Please.
terms of timetables, I mean, we have a lot, which is great. So I'm just curious what next steps would be in terms of refining this. And, you know, obviously there's the platform. Neil, I think it was Neil, you brought up different avenues for dissemination and whatnot. And then of course the topically, you know, we have so much, and you know, what the sequence would be roughly.
Barbara, if you want to jump in, I can.
Has I thoughts, but first I see Andrea's hands up, so go when you go to him first.
Yes, I also have a newbie question, which is especially related to voices from the field. What is this group capacity to work in other languages than English? Since I haven't never been in a SID event before, is there possibility for simultaneous translation, or do we need to think about people that speak English?
That's a good question. I'm going to toss that over to Paul to answer that specific one, because so I think one thing I should mention is both Patrick and I are fairly new. I became co-chair about 6 months ago, and Patrick joined a couple months ago, a little longer than 6 months ago. So we've held one event and it was in English, but I think that's a really good point. Paul?
Sorry, can you just to make sure I have that fully understood, just to repeat that again?
So what is our capacity for example, what I think I understand is, you know, if we wanted to bring in a voice from the field, someone who doesn't necessarily speak English. So do we have capacity in-house to do translation simultaneously?
We don't. We're a really small team. Like you see that we have, there are 3 SID staff members on this call. That's like half of this full-time staff. We just honestly don't have, we would like to, but unfortunately we just don't have the capacity. We're already really stretched thin as it is. So unfortunately we can't. I apologize. I would like to do so. I mean, that's the part of our goal. Our goal is to be as inclusive as possible and living up to that mission statement. It's just a matter of capacity at that point, and we just don't unfortunately have it. We're already stretched pretty thin as it is.
Well, that being said, if any of the members could step forward and provide, if you're providing a speaker or participant that doesn't speak English, if you can come up with a translator, well, that would be okay.
That's a great point, Rick. And Rule has already volunteered for Arabic. So, and I think that is the great thing about our membership is that I get the sense that folks are willing to pitch in, and I think we could definitely cover Arabic, Spanish, French, at least at minimum. So I think if we have someone identified, let's not let that be a showstopper at all. We'll try to make it work, I think, speaking. So great.
Barbara, unless people object, is there any chance of you sending to everybody else's email address so we can contact one another on some of these issues? I mean, use my name.
Yeah, Paul is again good. I'm gonna toss that back to Sid because he's the holder of the email list. Paul? Has he left us?
Oh, I apologize. I stepped away. I had to go to the bathroom really quick. I missed that.
Okay, so yeah, Irving was asking about the email distro list and if we share that for this group.
No, we don't. For privacy reasons, we don't.
Okay. No, I understand.
But a number of people like mine. Go ahead.
Sorry. as an alternative, what I did with the civil society work group is I created a work group on LinkedIn and encourage people to join, and the conversation can take place there.
So we, as Rick, as you're probably aware, we completely dissolved those because it depended on the work group, and most of the work groups were not using them at all. It just kind of sat there and did absolutely nothing. So we are currently working on trying to find another alternative to that solution, to providing a forum in between events.
Well, but until you find that alternative, this is what we have available now.
Yes, but SID-W staff still needs to be monitoring it.
Okay.
Hey, Paul, at minimum, can you send me your email address so I can ask you for others in case I need it? Herb Rosenthal.
Great. And just to also mention, a number of people have put their emails in the chat to, I think, probably 50% at this point. And of course, you can always contact me or Patrick. We're always available for conversations or engagement. I've already exchanged a couple of emails about this particular session with a number of you. Great. Let's see, what else? In terms of process, I think Patrick and I need to huddle and write something up. And then, in particular with the Biden administration, part of this is going to depend on timing. If we want to hear from them about their plans, we need to give them some time to get in place, et cetera. So I think I would say, and Derek, you have a lot of experience with this. I think, at minimum, it's going to take us 3 or 4 months to pull together the next event. So I would stay tuned. We do send announcements out about the events well in advance. And I think that's really all I have at this point on planning. Derek, do you want to add anything else based on your experience as a co-chair?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. I think one thing to recognize is when it's basically an all volunteer effort. And so planning takes a long time for these kinds of things. So in the past, we would sort of target, one event in the spring and then one in the fall for the 2 events, and tended to avoid summer because a lot of people were traveling. Obviously, with COVID, that did not interfere. And so, for example, the event we did on TWP and political economy analysis was right there at the end of July, but people weren't going anyplace. So we'll have to see. I mean, I suspect if people get vaccinated, there may be an explosion of travel over the summer as people are desperate to get out. So we'll see. But I would say, just in terms of Patrick and Barbara, your own planning, I'd sort of target something in the May-June timeframe, and then kind of work backwards from that and see what makes sense, whether it's either that first, the Biden topic, or one of the others in combination, and just see whichever one seems to make the most sense logistically in terms of pulling things off. The other thing also is if you're talking about bringing in voices from the field, that also adds another layer of complexity. When we did the thing with the videos, obviously there's a resource implication there, and our partner organizations, RTI being one of them, we were able to find internal resources to pay for doing that. So it's one thing to say, oh yeah, we can always video stuff, but it really does require somebody ponying up some real money to do that kind of stuff. So again, I mean, that isn't to say it can't happen, but it just needs to be recognized that there are both time and resource commitments involved in doing these things. It can definitely be worth it. I mean, that was I think a fantastic event, and so we'll just have to see where it goes. And thanks to Barbara and Patrick for stepping up to being co-chairs. And as always, to Paul for his terrific support over the years in making these events with SID Washington a big success.
Can I add, Derek, with the Civil Society Work Group, as you point out, this is an all volunteer organization. What we did was if someone wanted to, if we had numerous ideas, I asked the participants, okay, why don't you put together a one-page concept paper? This is the topic, this is the type of person or the people that I'd like to get involved, and turn it over to the chairs and let the chairs say, yeah, that's doable, or pass around the others and say, what do you think?
Great. Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Derek, for your kind words as well. So a couple other things to note. We do have a number of volunteers. I should have also mentioned, we will, of course, be reaching out to you all directly. Thank you for volunteering. And then the second thing to mention is in the chat, SID has posted a general email address that you can also reach out to, and just to also emphasize that the recording of the event and other resources will be on the website as well. So I just wanted to flag that. Patrick, did you have anything else? I see we're at time, so I do want to respect everyone's schedules and finish on time if we can. Thanks, Patrick.
Nothing else to add. Thanks again to everyone for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Barbara and I'll be back in touch. Sure, Neil, go ahead.
Yes, sir, Neil.
And I hate, this has the feeling, I don't mean this to roll in a grenade in the 59th minute, but this group needs to be more diverse.
Yes. No, I agree. I noted that as well.
So what are we going to do about that?
Yeah, so as Derek mentioned, for the last event we had, that was, as Derek mentioned, I think I was a broken record on that. And so we worked really hard to make sure that the panel and the participants, that it was a diverse group in terms of that. In terms of membership, if you have any suggestions or anyone else has suggestions for reaching out, I will say, for this, I was remiss in making sure that for this particular planning session, we looked at that in terms of, I think to be honest, we received the participant list just yesterday. So, but I think that was a failure on our part for this particular discussion. But for the planning sessions, we'll have more time.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think that in terms of events will be a consideration, but I'm also thinking about the quality of our discussions. If we're very monochromatic and heavily gendered, and it's for this field, there's no real excuse for that. And so what I would recommend is phone a friend. Let's do some recruiting.
And we also, Neil, before you joined, we talked about a post survey related to the topic. So that would be another way we can try to engage a broader audience as well. But I love the phone. I'm going to use that in my next meeting. Phone a friend.
And then I think one other thing would be on the issue of diversity is to reach out to the disability community. There's a lot of innovative work being done in that particular area. And so in thinking about constituencies, let's just not overlook that. Sorry for arriving late and holding forth late.
No, those are really important points. All right, any alibis, any last?
All right, I'll just chime in on that. Neil, just to address your concern, we have at least, yes, we do recognize that we need to improve on that as an organization. And we've created a task force on our board to figure out some of those things and how to, look at what we're doing and kind of, not auditing per se, but looking at what we're doing internally and figuring out how we can best address that, but also kind of do some of the things that we're doing external facing things that we do, pieces of our programming.
Yeah.
And then we're also reaching out to, we also did just, we will announce it formally next week, but we also created a work group that will be around that space, around race, ethnicity, and diversity, international development. So we did do that as well. We also have been trying to work with Gallaudet University on disability inclusion as well, trying to get sign language interpreters at our events. We're trying to make that work. And It's just kind of a fun, like just working it out with them. So we have been working on those things. Particularly, we did an event on disability inclusion last April and have been working on that issue ever since.
Can I add one of the things that when we were organizing civil society work groups, and it was a big push a few years ago to look for co-sponsorship. So look at some of the other committees, some of the other work groups.
Yes, we
look
talked
at
about that.
the women
Yeah.
and the gender group. Look at the health group. Look at the, and bring them and approach them and say, let's work together on it.
Yes,
Thank you. We had a great discussion about that earlier as well. And thanks to Rula for offering to help us on the persons with disabilities issue. Rula will be reaching out to you on that. Anything else before we thank you all again? Thank you, Rula. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a final comment. This is the first time that I actually joined a working group. I've been a member of SID through my company for a long time, but I think one of the things is that it wasn't clear to me how often the working group met, and sometimes people respond better if there is a set time on their calendar than having to every time register for a meeting, just in terms of feedback. Another thing that I wanted to say is I get a lot of emails from SID when it's the conference or the annual dinner or the career fair, but perhaps there's not that level of outreach perhaps for the working groups. It's kind of buried in the newsletter and you have to look for it and then go to the website and then register and then get a link, and the calendar invite that you download does not have the link, which is I think maybe why some people were late. It was sent separately. So maybe it's just the technology, little fixes here and there that could help. And I will be phoning some friends, so no worries.
Okay, great. Thank you again. Patrick, any last words?
No, that's all. I'm being called to dad duty here. Thanks all. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Great to
Bye.
see you.